I confessed to my mom everything that had been going on. At some point, I couldn't hide it anymore. She would take me around. It was back in the days before the internet. The internet was kind of in its infancy. So when it came to spiritual practitioners, you were kind of stuck with whatever was locally in the phone book that you could come across to go find someone. She did the best she could. And we went to Reiki practitioners. We went to tarot card readers, Wicca people to try and clear the room, all kinds of things. But there was never anybody who could give me any definitive answers about what I was dealing with, and certainly nobody who was able to help in any way.
I have a guest today who's not just a traveler of the physical world, but an explorer of the unseen dimensions of existence. Her journey began in childhood, navigating bewildering yet enlightening phenomena that shaped her sense of reality. Over the past 30 years, she has engaged in astral travel, spirit interactions, and lucid dreaming, uncovering profound insights into the nature of life and human consciousness. Now, through her podcast, she shares these extraordinary experiences with the world, demystifying what lies beyond the veil and encourages others to explore their consciousness. Please join me in welcoming Katherine Gillett, a lifelong student of the universe and a guide to the mysteries of existence.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It makes it sound so much grander than it feels.
Let's dive in. Reading your bio, my imagination steps into a vast cosmic library where each book is a universe, every chapter is a new dimension, and every page has a different frequency of existence. And as I open these books, I'm weaving my journey into this great narrative of the cosmos. Beginning this journey is like walking into a dark forest with a single spark in your hand. That spark, that curiosity, lights the way and reveals paths that twist and turn into the unknown.
Interestingly enough, my journey began as a reader. I was an avid reader as a child, so much so that my mom used to take us to the public library. And my curiosity, or perhaps my inner guidance, led me to the grown-up section, the metaphysical section, where I found a book called Soul Travel and thought it sounded neato. So I checked that out, took it home, and really what it outlined was just a meditative practice, much like any standard meditative practice you'd find pretty much anywhere nowadays. I took up as a hobby as a child, meditating in the evenings. And I had come out of a agnostic family, no spiritual background whatsoever. I'm not the kind of kid, I did not get told stories about angels, didn't get taken to church. It was all very scientifically minded. The daughter of a lawyer who was the son of a surgeon. To me, it was like a science experiment. If I do these practices, what is the result? What happens? If you got it out of the grown-up section, there must be something to it, right? It must be real. I had an open mind going into it and treated it a lot like a science experiment.
I can see from your childhood, you were ignited by a spark of curiosity and the courage to confront the unknown. Like fire, your early experiences burned away preconceptions, leaving a foundation for self-discovery and growth. Can you share your first astral travel experience and describe how it ignited your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. After spending some time practicing meditating, the first thing that happened was I actually got well, people call it getting a download nowadays, but in those days we weren't downloading anything. That was kind of before downloading was a thing. So I called it getting the knowing. And the first knowing I ever got actually said, you're not really in your body to begin with. It's more like a frequency. Physical reality is more like a radio station. The concept behind the download was more like you're streaming this reality. But all the other stations, just like your radio, are all streaming simultaneously. And if you know how to change your dial, shift your tuner to the different frequencies, the different stations, really any of it is experienceable. I didn't have any idea what that meant as a 12-year-old, but not long after that, I had been laying on the couch just reading a book one afternoon and went to shift my body to roll over. And I thought I had fallen onto the floor off of the couch. But when I stood up and turned around, my body was still lying on the couch right where it had been. And I was no longer in it. That was the first time I ever got out of my body. And of course, like most people, that initial happening is a kind of a shock and sort of shocks you right back into your body. Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. You sort of flounder and end up right back in. But I had done the thing that was in the book. It was real. After that, it would happen sporadically and unintentionally. It wasn't something I had very good control over or really understood what was happening, but it was an exciting enough result, right? That it was back to the public library for me. Because if that's real, then, I wonder what else is real. And so on the second trip, I checked out a book that was all on ancient Gaelic rites. And for whatever deranged adolescent reason, I thought it would be fun for my first foray into performing rites to pick summoning fairies, because I was really thinking tea with Tinkerbell. Disney warps the mind in so many ways, right? So I set up the whole ritual and did the whole thing, all the instructions that were in there for setting it all up. And because I was aware of the energy feeling in my body and how to amass energy and how to compress it and how to use it from all of the meditation practice I had been doing, I instinctively did that and let that out into the words that it wanted me to speak. Nothing happened. It felt so powerful and magical. No fairies showed up to have tea with me in that moment. I was disappointed and walked away from it until I was doing my meditation practice that night. And I ended up flung out of my body completely across the bedroom, stood up and looked, and sitting on the bed, hunched over me, was this big, looming, dark figure just hovering over my body, which was still on the bed. I panicked completely, freaked out, tried to flee, only to end up back in my body, only to end up right back out of my body, only to panic and flee again. And the pattern would continue. And this would happen 5, 6 times a night for weeks, for months on end. There was this presence, this figure in my room, and I couldn't escape from it or figure out what to do with it. It got to the point where I was losing sleep. It was impacting. I didn't want to get up for school in the morning. My mom would find me curled up asleep on the couch in the living room because I didn't want to be in my room. One night I finally got fed up with it enough that I was like, what are you? Like, what do you want? Why are you here?
How did you find the courage to explore these realms that others might fear or dismiss?
Well, if I'm being completely honest, the first step in all of that was fear. It was very frightening. But with all things, at first there's fear, then there's frustration or anger. And that was where we got to next. What are you? What do you want? Because fear and fleeing isn't doing any good, right?
Was there loneliness as well?
Yes, absolutely. I confessed to my mom everything that had been going on. At some point, I couldn't hide it anymore. She would take me around. It was back in the days before the internet. The internet was kind of in its infancy. So when it came to spiritual practitioners, you were kind of stuck with whatever was locally in the phone book that you could come across to go find someone. She did the best she could. And we went to Reiki practitioners. We went to tarot card readers, Wicca people to try and clear the room, all kinds of things. But there was never anybody who could give me any definitive answers about what I was dealing with, and certainly nobody who was able to help in any way. I think the best that we ever got was the woman who was working with my energy was like, well, I can feel something there, but I can't move it. It won't budge. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it's going to be up to you to deal with it, was essentially what she told me.
How did you cope with the loneliness and fear that accompanied these early experiences?
Well, the answer to that is kind of twofold. First of all, this went on for long periods of time, and not only was the original presence there, but it turned out that I ended up being an open portal or a magnet for all sorts of things of that nature. Because I became so hyper aware of other energy in my presence, I could feel that thing before I even knew it was there, before I could see it. I became hyper aware of sensing other personality constructs in my field of consciousness. And eventually my dreams changed. And I began to sense other presences in regular dream states. I do recall I would suddenly turn and look at somebody who was just a regular dream character and be like, you're not my friend. Who are you? Or you're not my mom. Who are you? They began to answer me like, oh, you're right. I'm not. But maybe we should wake you up now. Or you're right. This is a dream and I'm not your mom, but maybe we should talk about it. So I became inadvertently a lucid dreamer, but my trigger was when other personality constructs were in my presence. So I didn't have the normal triggers of a lucid dreamer. I didn't even know what lucid dreaming was at the time. But because I could sense presences, because I could sense the energy of other personalities, it would trigger a lucid state in normal dreams. The personalities, the entities that I would come across in these lucid states, fortunately took a little bit of pity on me. It was those personalities who helped me learn how to control astral states, helped me learn how to control my energy. I learned a lot from interacting with those personalities. So the sense of loneliness on the 3D level, like on the reality level, there was not much that I could do with that. It did ultimately as a teenager, and it's a good thing for people to know and to keep an eye out for, is it ended up triggering what people would classify as delinquent behavior. Sometimes the only way I could get to sleep was by smoking a bunch of pot or drinking a bunch of vodka. Otherwise, I was insomniac. I couldn't sleep. I had this nothing really matters sort of attitude. When you're that young and don't have any way of understanding what you're experiencing, but you know that there's more than this reality, it kind of becomes a little bit whose authority really matters.
You get a sense of nihilism. Yeah.
Yes, it triggered within 3D reality. It triggered some delinquent behaviors that ultimately got out of control and led to being institutionalized for a time.
How did you reconcile them with your sense of self?
I learned very early on that most adults in this situation were not going to understand what I was talking about. So I never confided in anyone along the lines, school counselors, people in the facilities, anybody along those lines. Because I came up from a scientific mindset, I spent most of my youth fearing diagnosis. I didn't want them to tell me I was a high functioning schizophrenic, the clairaudience, hearing voices, seeing visions, things like that. I didn't want to end up medicated and permanently on lockdown. So I never told any of the adults outside of my mom what had been going on. As a minor, once you confide, you don't have a lot of control over what happens to you after that.
What were the most transformative moments in your early explorations?
Coming across certain personalities on the other side who would take the time to stop and speak with me about how to control my abilities were very transformative and affirming for me and helped me to gain more of a sense of control. And I think the curiosity of it also was very transformative in driving me forward. Like I would be in a normal dream just sitting on the couch, and I remember one suddenly just appearing next to me on the couch, and I looked over like, "Who are you?" He looked at me and said, "Oh, you can see me? Well, good for you. You know, they look for people like you." And I was like, "They who?" And it was the little things like that that were like, wait a minute, who's they? We were still on who are you? And so there was also a sense of curiosity or a sense of adventure in it as well. Looking back on it, when I was a very small child, I always loved fighter pilots and Top Gun. I was going to be cooler than Tom Cruise. I wanted to be an astronaut. I thought Apollo 13 was the coolest movie ever. I was going to be out in space. And in those days, my gender was barring to that. Women weren't allowed to be fighter pilots. The space program pulls from the test pilot program. So those pathways were closed off to me because of my gender. Looking back, I realized I had those proclivities because there was something else in store for me. The element of curiosity was transformative, coupled with the growing knowledge, the growing ability to control my states, to be able to move around freely in an astral state. It was the others who taught me how to create portals and move between realms and shift perspectives. And as I gained more control over what I was doing, the confidence was built and the curiosity was piqued. So that helped push me forward and encouraged me.
In Jungian terms, fire represents the shadow, those hidden parts of ourselves we fear to face. How did you confront the shadow in your early experiences?
That was a long and ongoing thing. It's difficult because the story is interwoven, they're all taking place at the same time. On one hand, I was gaining confidence and control. Much of what I was learning was also the ability to face fear, to control fear situations, and to manipulate fear situations. So, one of the things the others would work with me on was nightmare scenarios. in a lucid dream state, something intentionally scary, but can I maintain control, shift the environment, those kinds of training scenarios. I had a good deal of help learning to let go of fear and maintain control of my energy levels, to amass energy, to use energy, to shift the environment, step out of that sphere of reality if I didn't like it, or manipulate and control pieces of it. Now, in a physical reality astral state, things are less manipulatable than they are in a dream state, right? But what it did teach me was to be able to control myself, control my fear, and control my own energy levels in that state. So it was very helpful. I went through all of the stages with the shadow people and came eventually to realize there's also different kinds of shadow people. I went through all of the fear. I went through all of the anger, the rage, the fighting back, trying to fight in any way I could, or beat them up, or kill them, or make them go away. All of that sort of anger and rage and fighting back. Eventually, I got to a place of apathy. Like, oh, it's you again? How long are we going to do this? What do you even want? Why are you here? I almost got to a place of boredom and apathy with it. At some point, I remember asking one of them that was sitting on my bed with me and looking like a scary, dark figure. I just kind of looked at it and was like, so what were you anyway? Were you human, or are you something else? Were you like me originally, or do you come from somewhere else? What even are you? And there was an overwhelming energy of sadness and rejection that came off of that question. It had made it feel unrecognized, not human, or no longer human. It got me thinking that some of what I'm interacting with is not necessarily mean and scary, or rather, it gives you a broader perspective on all human characteristic. Like, that which seems mean and scary is actually just sad and insecure. There was a lot of that energy underneath the shadow people I would interact with. Some of them definitely don't come from a sphere of reality that have a similar emotional pattern to humans. Those kinds of energies feel very different. But a lot of what I was interacting with had similar emotional patterns to human emotional patterns, which didn't track with everything I had been experiencing. When I came to grips with that, I started training in a couple of different scenarios. One of them was that I experienced my own death several times, to have to go through that, like experiencing a death from another life. And then I would find myself helping human souls in transition. So I would be the entity on the other side assisting someone who was crossing back over. I would be suddenly sitting in a car next to an individual who is just gripping the steering wheel and staring at a concrete barrier and being like, I think we need to get out of the vehicle and go beyond the barrier. Then I could see images of his grandmother watching him in a corner of a room, and I was able to produce a little drum and say, remember I used to watch you when you were a kid? And it was like, oh yeah. Then we were walking down towards the light at the end of the tunnel. I would find myself in these scenarios where I was helping to guide people who were coming across to the other side. Somewhere around the training scenarios like that, a shift happened with some of the shadow people I was working with. Suddenly they didn't look like shadows anymore. I started to be able to see what the original personality pattern was. What used to look like a dark, scary figure sitting on my bed, being a brat and trying to get my attention, suddenly looked like a 28-year-old ginger with blue eyes. I would look at him and he just looked at me and was like, you can actually see me. I was like, uh-huh. So really, it was, some of them turned out to be people who vibrationally, for whatever reason, when they crossed over, were just like this and couldn't quite make the connection to fully embrace the light or fully move over, and got themselves a little bit stuck and started acting pokey or bratty or mean even to whoever could sense them or pay attention to them.
I get the sense you went into the descent. Everybody talks about the ascent in personal development, but there is a huge cultural resistance to the deep descent. Modern culture has created an architecture of avoidance where the swift fix replaces the sacred descent. There's all kinds of myths about this. But I see you've gone into the descent rather than the quick fix, faced your shadow, faced all of those elements, and emerged from that. We're always interacting with our shadow. It's an ongoing journey. But that's where the gold is. That's where you start cultivating the soil for those skills to take root.
I agree completely that as much help as people like to call them ascended beings or higher beings or angels or guides, however you want to say that, it was never a language I used because I didn't come from a spiritual background. But as much as they were helpful in being able to guide me through pieces of the process to help me understand, it was my interaction with the shadow people that actually helped illuminate for me not just a lot about myself, but a lot about human nature in general. I learned unconditional love from interacting with those beings. Once I was detached from my own fear, my own sense of invalidity, my own anger or retaliation in the situation, even my own apathy or giving up in the situation, when I moved past all of that and really removed my own responses, I was able to see through the shadow to the people that were actually there. What was really there was lost, sad, grief, confused, angry themselves, all those same things that I had been feeling. It was a very illuminating experience, not just about pieces of myself, but about the human condition and humanity in general. So it was a very valuable experience for sure.
There are key cultural barriers to descent. One of them is the speed imperative. Culture values instant solutions, and the psychological and spiritual descent requires slow and uncomfortable gestation. Modern systems prioritize efficiency over depth, and quick fixes promises immediate relief without the messy work of transformation. In the comfort paradigm, society's pathologized necessary suffering. So we've medicalized normal human responses to loss and grief and the marketing of comfort as the highest good. Avoidance of discomfort is seen as wisdom rather than defense. So there's all kinds of things from pills and programs and packages which promise transformation, but without dissent. And you can't package this, you can't predict it. There are no guaranteed outcomes. It's a hard sell.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for the fact that even our modern sensibilities about it were grown up out of older sensibilities about it. I've met many practitioners, many light workers, many people who do this kind of work who will, personalities such as they'll just try to clear them out or reject them or not look at them, and those are just tricksters. We don't look at it. We don't look at the dark. We don't deal with the dark. We don't interact with those personalities. And to me, it's like saying we don't interact with those pieces of ourselves. It can be traced back through the ages to legends about demons and incubus and succubus. And for a long, long time, humanity has rejected their darker features. And I think what you're talking about is the modern equivalent of the same thing. We want to medicate those away and not look at them. Back in the day, they used to have a priest shout at it or however they wanted to do that.
There's a huge cost to avoidance. If I look at it from the context of psychological superficiality, without dissent, we lose access to deeper resources, and superficial coping mechanisms become brittle under real pressure. So the shadow material accumulates the unexplored parts of us, and we become increasingly fragile despite what we think are our solutions. And this leads to a loss of transformative capacity, the ability to metabolize challenges or difficulty diminishes. So we lose that muscle of endurance, and transformation becomes feared rather than recognized as natural. So the capacity for rebirth atrophies.
Yeah, it's coming through the human experience, the human soul is like a frequency, but a frequency is up and down. If you were just a straight line on up, that's a flat line. That's called death. That's transition. If you're flatlining, then you're not doing it right. It's supposed to be this up and down. It's what creates your human frequency. You really can't deny the down or the shadow pieces if you want to fully experience the up pieces, because it's the contrast that really gives us the appreciation for both.
Your journey tells me that the resources are found precisely where we fear to look, where we fear to tread.
I sort of got dumped into the deep end without water wings at a very early age. And perhaps that was my path to just do it the hard way. Based on my personality, it wouldn't surprise me. There's a whole eternity, a whole infinity out there to explore. There are personalities that exist in realms that don't process things the same way humans do. But for us here, being able to face those fears, and so much is, looking back on it, I used to be so mad at the others. Why do you keep putting me in all these nightmares? Why do I keep having to transmute all these nightmares? Why are you teaching me? Like, why do I keep having to do this? But so much releasing the fear to realize that you really do have control over your frequency and you really can shape what you're experiencing. The most poignant way, the way that it was taught to me, as I was walking down this corridor that was full of all these scary doors, like an old insane asylum full of horrors behind the doors. At the end of the hallway, there was this final door, a big red door. And the sign on the door said, "No fear," as in N-O. And then when I looked at it again, it had changed and said, "No fear," K-N-O-W. It was clear to me that the only way to have no fear was to know fear, to move through it, to actually embrace it and walk through it. That was the way it was explained to me.
I can see you've honored rather than pathologizing that whole descent and creating as much as you can a safe container for exploration, recognizing the symptoms as calls to depth, supporting rather than bypassing the process. You're moving from pathology to process over quick fixes. That builds a capacity for discomfort and helps one to develop and establish a rapport and a relationship with the unknown. But you have to trust the wisdom of those non-corporeal entities, if you will.
I feel like you're giving me a lot of credit. It was a long journey over many years. There were years where I went kicking and screaming for a long time. I was never able to control it. It would just happen. I, to some degree, did always have a personality where I was more curious, more interested than I was afraid. So I never blocked myself from it. I probably could have told an adult or somebody and been put on medication or gone that route. But in some inner part of myself, I cherished it as a part of who I am. And I didn't want it to be medicated or to go away. Yeah, but there were absolutely times where I was terrified, where I was angry. I've been screaming at the universe, screaming at my angels and guides, kicking and screaming a long way for sure.
Interacting with non-corporeal entities is
Yeah.
like tuning into an ancient radio station broadcasting from a realm beyond what we call time. I imagine these messages could be cryptic, like whispers in the wind, but if you adjust your inner frequency just right, their frequency or the words or the telepathy can resonate like a symphony of wisdom. I can see your journey was guided by these interactions or beings that exist without a physical form encountered in astral travel or spirit interactions. And they've offered you wisdom beyond the physical realm. These encounters, I would imagine, are profound and mysterious, but they mirror, from what I'm seeing, they mirror universal archetypes found in mythology and psychology. What were some of the most profound lessons you've learned from these non-corporeal entities?
I think that the reason that many of these archetypes exist throughout mythology and human history and many cultures is because I'm not the first person to have channeled it. I think that there's a piece of all of us. I know there's a piece of all of us that exists in all of these frequencies already. We are one of the biggest things that is hard to wrap your mind around, but also very useful to incorporate and to know is that self is not the singular perspective of the waking ego personality. We really are a multidimensional frequency or a multidimensional coding that already exists, these different frequencies or all of these different stations. Self is a big multidimensional conglomerate of the whole of all of those experiences. And all of those experiences are reachable or interactable to some degree or another. You can pull from those experiences, and in fact those experiences are pulling from you. It's almost like, if I were to use a visualization, like self is like, if you imagine a giant apartment complex and you're staring out the window of it at this 3D reality. If you step back, you're in the apartment of your current self experience. But that apartment is on the same floor, the same horizontal plane with all of the other timelines, probabilities, the way things could have played out on that floor of the current self experience. It's like the floors above and below are past self, future self, but it's all playing out simultaneously in the apartment complex. Just because there is a progression of experience doesn't mean that we necessarily have to experience it in linear format from that side of things, from that perspective. What people frequently call inner self is the part of yourself that has access to all of the hallways, all of the elevators, can go knock on other doors. So you really have a vast array of experiences to draw from that are being pulled and whispered to you, those intuitions or frequencies that come through when we get those little downloads, those nudges when we hear things that can be pulled from any part of the experience or from any timeline that's trying to whisper to you, no, you go that way, because they can see from that inner perspective where those energy pathways lead. And higher self is almost like the apartment complex itself, like the consciousness that is the whole apartment building that actually has the perspective and its nerve endings, its feelers in every one of the apartments simultaneously and can take that whole experience in. So self is so much more than just the waking ego personality that we work with on a physical, tangible basis here. There's so much more of it to incorporate and explore and look into.
With a nerve end, and from the experiences I've had, there is a micro-coded compact essence within each one of us, whereby when we tap into it, we can become a multidimensional agency of amplification for those things that want to bring about an upgrade or an elevation for the human race, and for those things that are stuck somehow in between worlds.
You're spot on. A lot of what I do is follow energy pathways to beings who need a little bit of a hand up, a little bit of a connection to get their vibration smoothed out enough for the light or the higher dimensions to give them a hand up to move on from what they're doing. People, souls, beings that have become a little bit stuck in the in-between. So that's a lot of what I do. In order to do that work, I did have to find a place of unconditional love, which requires us to let go of fear, to let go of invalidity, to let go of insecurities and all of those types of things. A lot of my training was involved work like that, but it's so important for everyone, for humanity to get an upgrade altogether, that we let go of those things. As long as we look at each other like we're the other, there's something to fear. Someone's going to take our things. Someone's going to come and get us. These people are different. Their religion is different. Their culture is different. When we are all operating from that fear space, it makes it difficult for humanity as a whole to move past our more animalistic tendencies that were evolutionarily developed coming up in the 3D reality. But at this point, I think we're ready to move on from that and interact with each other and with higher realms in a different way.
Have there been any recurring themes or archetypes that have emerged in your interactions with these entities?
One of the things that I got told fairly early on and comes up occasionally is a reminder for me that as eager as it is to want to explore higher realms, I came here to be me and to be human. One of the first things that I got, I remember, and I was so irreverent and so difficult. I was shouting at one of my guides. I've always called her the golden haired lady because that's how she seems to be. And I was like, what are you doing? Why is this happening? You explain things now. I was so mad with all of this happening and no explanation. And I was like, fine, I'm leaving. I don't want to talk to you. I brought myself out of the trance state because I had enough control over myself at that point to do that. And she was not playing with me. I sat up in bed and I don't want to talk to her anymore. Suddenly I was like, boom, unconscious, dragged right back down into it. And I found myself standing in a room looking at this magnificent painting. It was a horizontal landscape. And it was as if the landscape was just oozing and undulating and building on itself. It was expanding inward exponentially. Like every stroke of paint was creating more strokes of paint. And it was ever changing and just immersive. It was astonishing looking at it. Then as I was sitting there losing myself, staring into its depths, the whole painting floated up, turned vertical, and the first painting fell away. And what was behind it was breathtaking, completely indescribable. Like I couldn't even put into words what was there. Tears started to fall down my face. And the golden-haired lady standing next to me said, "Yes, that which lies beneath is amazing, but it's behind the other for a reason." And I think it was the first time that I really realized that this 3D reality is like a beautiful piece of art. And those of us who come here come because we love art. We came because this is what we wanted. We wanted to create here. We wanted to experience the depth and the possibilities, all of the color and vibrancy, all of the tangible feelings and sensations that come with being in this beautiful compound consciousness structure that we operate through here, our physical bodies and our physical senses. Yes, the mysteries of beyond are tantalizing and they are fantastic and amazing. There's so much out there. But in that moment, I realized, and I sometimes get reminded again, that this realm is why we really came. It's exciting and magical here as well, if you know how to look at it and how to see it.
You're bringing back treasures from a distant land. And each insight is like a gemstone. The process of grounding them into daily life is like cutting and polishing these gems so they can reflect light in practical, tangible ways. Earth symbolizes grounding and stability and the integration of these experiences into daily life. Your journey hasn't just been about exploration, but also about finding practical ways to share and apply these insights. You were raised in an agnostic household. You were free from dogma, which I'd imagine allowed you to approach consciousness and human potential with a certain objectivity. And these experiences may have blurred the lines between the mystical and the scientific, challenging conventional thinking and opening new possibilities for exploration. I want to delve into how has your upbringing influenced your approach to exploring consciousness?
Well, certainly, I think everybody has their own sort of, how do we say this? Their base socializations to work through and overcome or integrate in their own way in order to express and understand their soul, their interaction, what they really believe is going on. And whether you're a scientifically minded person, or religious, spiritual, or Wiccan, or whatever that is, finding that piece that actually matches you, that resonates for you, and is how you want to be. I think there's always something in our early experiences that push us in that direction or lead us to exploration. For me, growing up in a completely non-spiritual family, it added a layer to this where it was always scientific method. I have notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of dream journals and meditation channel journals and things of my experience. I kept a lot of records of what was happening. I was constantly looking back over those records and reevaluating them. One of the things that I tell people a lot is if you're interested in any kind of exploration of your dream, just anything, keeping notes, keeping a journal, keeping some kind of record has really proved very useful, because I can go back and look at things that happened 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, and go, oh my gosh, I can see the pattern. I can see what happened here. And it really does help to have those field notes. More so than that, part of confronting this for me was overcoming the fear of crazy and recognizing that as much as in modern society, we look at deeply religious people as kooky or out there, dogmatic science can be as rigid and just as avoidant. It's difficult for that community to look at things that don't have an explanation and say, we don't know. We just really don't understand human consciousness that well. We really just don't understand the human body that well. We're always tinkering with it and toying with it and doing things. We really don't understand the expansiveness of this universe all that well. We don't understand why quantum physics and regular physics don't match up. We don't understand what dark energy is. There's a lot. I think it's hard for science because they rely so much on empirical evidence, and there's so much that they still don't understand. They almost become very hard-lined. And overcoming that idea of crazy for myself. Sometimes I talk to people and they're like, how do you respond when people think you're crazy? I'm like, trust me, you don't think I'm crazier than I've thought about myself. So it really doesn't offend me because you're not thinking anything that I haven't thought myself 100 times. So coming up in that environment, I had to face the truth that there's nothing crazy happening. I function fine in life. I know the experiences I have are real and there isn't anything wrong with me. That was a hard, I remember crying. One night I ended up pulled out of my body, shot clean out past the stars in a sphere of reality that I had trouble processing and almost got kicked back to a void space because I wasn't acclimating well, wasn't able to match the vibration. And the entity that met me there, whoever I had come across met me in the void space. I'm standing in this plain square room floating in the middle of a black void looking at this human looking figure, but the voice is not coming out of the mouth. It's like a dummy, like a representation of a figure I'm looking at. I said, do you talk to people like me often? Like humans? You speak to people like me often? And it said, ability come here rare, your kind. When I got back from that interaction, I remember just crying. Why am I so weird? There is full circle back to the alienation, the crazy, the nobody will ever understand this. I can't bring this up at a water cooler. Like when I meet Susie at work the next day and they're like, how was your evening? I can't be like, oh, it was great outside of the extraterrestrial that was in my bedroom and the spirits I helped cross over last night. How was your day? But there's power in confronting, I think, the fact that we don't have those answers readily available. There's not an expert that can diagnose this or talk about it or go into it, right? Everybody has their own perspective on it. And science isn't there for the experience any more than some dogmatic religions are. It's valuable to blaze your own trail, come up with your own terminology for it, come up with your own way of understanding what's happening outside of whatever the standard definition is.
It's important not to stick something that is evolutionary, i.e., the human, in an old box. One of the things about these kinds of conversations is you can either be trapped as a prisoner of the past or be a pioneer of your future. These conversations are going to be commonplace and there'll be much more acceptance. If you're a pioneer of the future, you will be alone. You won't be able to stand around the water cooler and talk about the experience that you described. But I think you are a pioneer of a future, and you've got to find the way, look for the signposts, be receptive to these things. Many a time what I see is that people will project onto you their opinions because they're not looking at their faults.
You're not just whistling Dixie there. Every time I tried to speak to anyone who was any kind of authority or a spiritual practitioner in any way, it was absolutely the wide eye first and then immediately the diagnosis. Like, how does your experience fit into my paradigm? How does your experience fit into my reality? And that was a very uncomfortable feeling in just about any spiritual circle or group that I've ever been in. It was immediately desperate to take what I was experiencing and make it fit into the belief structure for sure. That was always a very uncomfortable experience.
Those belief systems will access a certain potential, which will initiate certain actions, which will produce results, which will either reinforce that belief system, which it usually does, or reshape it. But they've got to be open. Personally, I think there's an argument for getting rid of beliefs. Because look what it's done to the world. Look at history, what people believed, and the carnage that's been unleashed because of belief systems.
The underlying insecurity and fear that your belief is somehow invalid because somebody else believes something different. Underlying that is fear of rejection, fear of isolation, fear of being different, fear of not wanting to bring it up at the water cooler, frankly, because somebody was going to look at me like I was crazy. And I do sometimes get people who are of a religious nature. You get the comments of Jesus loves you, repent, or rebuke demons. I totally get stuff like that. But at the same time, I feel like there's value value in speaking on it. Every single time I interact with someone like you, every time I do an interview or that I talk to somebody else, I find out a little bit more. I find out a little bit more about what kinds of things people are interested in, how to express answers to different questions in different ways that help make things clearer. Sometimes it's difficult to take concepts that we don't really have words for in human language and figure out how to put a linear word order on it that makes it conveyable to other people. Every time I put myself out there, I learn a little bit more about how to communicate it clearer. I learn a little bit more about what things are of interest to other people. It's a valuable experience. It's okay if you believe something, but it's also okay if other people don't. We don't need to all be the same. There's not really a reason for enforced conformity. Other people are never going to be the kind of security blanket that actually make you feel secure because they're their own person and nobody can be perfect for you 100% of the time. So trying to wrap yourself in a belief or a community or that kind of a security blanket is never going to lead to actual inner validity.
The brain is wired for survival, and culture organizes and propels you to fulfill an economic imperative. And I've nothing against making money, but the way it's structured is the requirement is for you to conform, because if you conform to that structure, you get confirmed, and that provides you with a safety net. But it's an external safety net. So it doesn't cause inner stability and outer equilibrium. It makes them run towards a safety nest, as distinct from cultivating an inner safety net, which has got to be according to the individuality of that person, of their essence. Not Peter Michael Dedes, but the essence that I'm bringing, that I'm looking to contribute as a human being, as a life, so I can become that agency that amplifies that essence, so that I can speak it to others who have an open mind, who have the ears to listen.
Yeah, and even in like all people have, to your point, that inner validity is to express your value in an expansive way. So whatever it is that you have to contribute, really putting things out there in a way where an idea or a thought or something you did, a kindness that you did, something hits somebody else, that idea or that action or that energy expands to them and then beyond them. The little chain reactions that we set up.
The resonance.
Yes, the way your frequency reverberates off of other people, it's never going to feel secure and valid until the frequency you're reverberating off of other people is a true frequency to yourself, an authentic frequency of what it is you're really wanting to express.
How do you stay grounded while you're navigating these experiences?
Honestly, after years of experience, I've just realized that as long as this body is functioning, I'm not really separatable from it. If it was going to kill me, it would have done it by now. Do you know what I mean? So, and really, exploring in depth the physical connection, the connection that we have as consciousness to the physical body, which in and of itself is a compound consciousness structure. The way it's really interacting with and communicating with us consistently, it really is a beautiful bond. It's not a severable thing. It is my radio station, my tuner here in this reality. Until we've both decided this time to go our separate ways, it's not a severable connection. I have spoken to people who are very much like, how do you not get possessed? Or how do you know you don't just have multiple personality disorder? There's a lot of stuff like
Yeah.
that. I get a lot of questions like that. First of all, I mean, I've never met anything that, I don't know, maybe I'm just a stubborn person, but I never met anything that had the gumption to take me on and kick me. Like, you think you're kicking me out of this body? I never came across anything that I felt was capable of doing that. And as far as multiple personality disorder, I don't even consider that a thing. Of course, I have multiple personalities. I've had multiple lifetimes and multiple dimensional experiences. Even the one that is experiencing this life has gone through multiple phases and multiple changes. We evolve, we change, we become somebody different. It's an evolving experience. I feel pretty solidly connected to this body and fairly certain that nothing short of the mutual agreement between me and my body that it's time to go for now is going to kick me out of my body.
The whole thing of multiple personalities is a misnomer. Who's speaking? Is it the Catherine that's free? Is it the Catherine that has an astral experience? Is it the Catherine that stands around the water cooler? We all have these different faces all the time. We try to categorize things into departments because it gives us a feeling of safety, like we know what that is, but we don't. We really don't. I refuse to be one of those people that live in a box, watch a box, and then wait for a box. There needs to be a new way of, we need to scout for new paradigms, new ways of thinking, new language. As you're giving these things, I can see sometimes there might be a struggle to give it descriptive language. We've got to find the new language. You could have preparatory language, instructional language, but we have to get the connection to those things that allows us to bring what is ethereal into the material.
I have had the thought process on a number of occasions that where we get to with what we call spirituality or spiritual experiences is very close to some of what they're talking about on a very small quantum level in science. We're getting to a point where we're all talking about frequency, vibrations, and different dimensions. It's all starting to sound like it's coming a little bit closer together, like the things that people have been channeling and talking about for a long time is starting to come together with some of the things that they're talking about on a small scale with science. I can only imagine that a lot of things will change. A lot of paradigms will change as those languages merge together and become the things that we're talking about start to sound a lot closer together, that it will actually help open people's minds a lot more.
I want to talk about the science of self because I see that as a framework for understanding consciousness and human potential as natural and scientific phenomena rather than just a mystical occurrence. It's like peeling an onion. Each layer represents an aspect of your being, the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual. So as you peel away those layers, you uncover not emptiness, but the intricate network of energy and consciousness that forms the core of existence. And I hesitate to use the word core because I think we're replays of a core. I see the journey's culminating in the science of self in a way through years of exploration. It seems you've come to view phenomena like astral travel and spirit interactions not as just mystical but as facets of a deeper science of self. This perspective may challenge traditional views, but also encourages a more expansive understanding of human technology and its potential. Can you elaborate on your concept of the science of self and how it relates to your experiences?
Okay, so I'll try to put it into words as best that I can. As far as I can tell, for a long time, people have had mystical experiences or channeled information of the all is one and one is all. I've certainly had experiences where I stuck my foot in, if you were into that experience. So that was very illuminating to step into fully the consciousness of the other side and feel every molecule, every blade of grass, every grain of sand as an extension of myself and my own consciousness. I know their experience and simultaneously know that everything was also aware of me. So self is sort of self-replicating like an amoeba. Remember we were talking about the apartment complex of self? If you're the apartment building that's all of your current self experience, past life, future lives, all of the floors that are all of the potential branches of the probabilities of those experiences, then the apartment building is also in an apartment complex of other apartment buildings. Like that big city block encompasses all of those apartment complexes with all of those apartment buildings. The perspective of all of that, so too are you in your little apartment, your little end of that, also creating your own building as you go. All of the imaginings, all of the things that are branching off, all of the energy that you're creating, all of the future selves, the characters or the ideas that come through you. You are a room in the apartment, but you are also building the apartments of the future. You're also expansive yourself. When I see it in my head, it's like every consciousness is really just a moment point. It's like a lightning strike. Every point where it strikes just branches out into more strikes. that just, it goes out into forever in all directions. And there are energy pathways to any of those experiences. And sometimes they're closer energy pathways, perhaps a life that you personally had, or a lifetime that a branch off of your own self had. There's a closer connection to someone, an experience that's in a different complex. But those pathways are all still there. There's always a way that it all leads back. It's all connected. Does that make sense?
Yeah, when people talk about we're all one and oneness, there is a connective fiber between each one of us. And some of those have a compatibility of alignment, and some of them have an incompatibility of alignment. It's dependent on the energy you're processing, whether that has a resonance, like a tuning fork. If I have an A tuning fork and then I have another A tuning fork and I hit one, they resonate because they act in sympathy with each other. They recognize that resonance.
I understand what you're getting at. On a very broad perspective, all consciousness or all energy is the same being. But to deny the individuality of the experience is to miss the point, right? So we all came here to be individual and unique and find our frequencies with other people to expand and create as we go. So while we can appreciate the fact on a broader perspective that all creation has equality, we are also here to have our little blinders on and experience this in as much focused, fun, in-depth ways that we can for our current self-expression.
No one's got your fingerprint, no one's got your DNA. There won't be another Katherine Gillett. So your time here, even though it's a temporary appearance, is what do you do with that time, and what is going to be your contribution to fulfilling that mandate that, hey, you're given a body, here's a body, it's temporary. So I'm going to be a temporary appearance here on this planet. I have to think about, well, how am I going to evolve? How do I start to explore consciousness more deeply?
For some people who come here, it's an absolute lifelong love affair with consciousness and the exploration of self and pushing those boundaries and thinking in those bigger picture terms. Like, how could we be better as humanity? And what is the next step? I think that really does find resonance with people. And certainly it found a lot of resonance for me, and plainly a resonance for you. I also think some people want to lose themselves in their art or music, or they want to do their gardening or their botany. The exploration of self comes out in so many fantastic ways that are unique to each individual. As long as people are finding that thing that makes them feel like they're taking what is on the inside and putting it out in a way that has the opportunity to resonate with others, then we're finding that experience. I think all too often people's frustrations or people's discomfort come from hiding away that which is authentically them, feeling like they can't express it, or feeling like nobody will like it, or feeling like their life has trapped them in a box where what they really are can't come out. They're showing up at work every day doing the same drudgery and then going home, eating dinner, watching YouTube or whatever. And the real part of them that's wanting to come out and resonate with other people is finding a hard time expressing. I think that's the source of a lot of frustration for people.
I have a neighbor, he's a retired cop, and he does my garden. He loves it. The essence of his gardening is spiritual. When I see him doing what he's doing in practical terms, and I've had conversations with him, talking to him about sacred geometry and looking at some of the patterns in the flowers and the plants. He'd never thought about it, and that's fine. But the essence of what he does, it's magical. The essence of him hasn't gone because it's in the garden.
And it's resonated with you. You saw his art as sacred geometry, which was something he hadn't thought about, but now both of you have expanded in that way. You can now see his gardening as sacred geometry, and he now sees the flowers in a totally different way than he did before. And that's what I mean about having that genuine expression and letting it resonate and bounce off of other people. That's that value expansion. And that idea hits him, and maybe he shares it with somebody else, or maybe it makes him think differently about how he plants or does his garden, and maybe you are looking for different things in different gardens, where you go the next time to a garden, you're like, wow, somebody really thought about their sacred geometry here. That expansion resonates out into the world when we have those genuine interactions. That's the beauty and the magic of life, the simple interaction in a garden.
It's being that beacon of transmission. His beacon of transmission is practical. I'm not the most practical person because I'm too stuck in my head. For me to do the garden, yeah, I can mow the lawn or whatever, but to plant things, I could probably learn it if I watched YouTube or spent time with him, but I don't give my mind to plants in that way. But he does. And when he does, oh my gosh, the degree of precision that he has, like the edges, so precise. And when I watch him, I can see that he's one with the garden. The garden is him and he is the garden. There isn't a separation.
Absolutely.
And it's a joy to see.
It really is. And it can be simple things. You can love to be in the kitchen. You can love to bake. You can feed other people's vibration with your food all day long, and your love, the love that goes into creating it. It comes out differently for all people, but you get that sense and that feeling when it's authentic and when it's real, when it's really resonating. You can really sense the love that somebody has in what they're doing.
How do you think society's understanding of the potential of the human might evolve in the future?
Well, I would hope that we begin to recognize human consciousness as being capable of a lot more than we currently give it credit for. I think right now we're still kind of in our consciousness is just a product of weird electrical signals in our brain. But I do think that there's potential with how technologies are advancing and developing, that we may be able to get into doing some better things with it in the future. I know that they've worked on technologies that where you can attach the sensors to the brain, and actually they've been working on being able to pull like images out onto a screen from dreams or from people. The technology was worked on to help communicate with people who were in comas, but they've been using it for the potential of maybe being able to see dreams on a screen, to be able to take that. But you attach something like that to someone like me, I may be able to bring you pictures back from the other side of a black hole. And I think in that way we may be able to begin to understand the real potential of consciousness, and in an exploratory fashion. I think that's possible moving forward.
Yeah, we will understand what this unexplored continent is about. It'll go beyond mere electrical signals. I also understand you have a podcast.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, what role do you see your podcast playing in helping others integrate their journey?
At this point, what I do on spirituality is just a comfy couch conversation for various spiritual practitioners to kind of meet up and kind of like dish reality on what their experiences really are. I think so much of the spiritual talk that's out there all kind of falls along the same lines. It all kind of tracks with love and light, and it becomes a little bit bland and almost dogmatic in its own way. But I do think most people who are practitioners became practitioners born out of their own experiences. And those experiences, like my experiences, they're not always love and light. They're not always fun. There is shadow work. There are things that happen that are not fun, that are scary. And I hope to encourage people to speak on those matters a little bit more, not to shy away from them, and to shine a little bit of a light on things for people. I feel like there is a tendency within the spiritual community towards what's kind of generally referred to as toxic positivity, or to your point that you spoke on earlier, the inability to look at anything, like to even look at anything bad will mess up your vibration, or it's going to mess up my manifestation. And I feel like that's a very unstable, shaky ground to be on. It's sort of like being here in this human reality, this 3D reality, but to be a spiritual practitioner, I liken it to being, if you were a healer or a battlefield doctor, like you're not going to get very far if you can't look at the wounds. Sometimes things look ugly, or they look scary, or they look messy, but to have any impact with that, you first have to be able to look at it first and hold your own stomach, right? So it's not going to do a lot of good to simply turn away or not look at it. So I like to get into people's backstories, to get into how they developed their spiritual activities, and to talk about some of those things that people don't like to look at sometimes.
Where can people find your podcast?
My YouTube channel is called Vibrational You, and that's with a U. because I think we're all here to learn how to work with our own vibration. It's all Earth School, right? Everybody came here to learn something. You can find me on YouTube. The podcast is called Spirituality. You can find it on the channel. You can also find it on Spotify.
Your journey is a testament to the power of curiosity, courage, and connection. You remind us that exploring the unknown isn't only about finding the answers, but it's about embracing the power of discovery. I want to thank you so much for guiding us through these realms and showing us what lies beyond the veil. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
Do you have any parting words at all?
Oh gosh, I mean, what do you say at the end of the day? We've said so much already, but really, there isn't a feeling that you have, whether it's fear or sadness or guilt or shame, that's really inflicted by other people. All of our feelings are there to communicate something to us. So whether they're happy feelings like joy and positivity and all of that, or whether they're sadness and depression or something uncomfortable, our feelings are like a sixth sense. They're really the unrecognized communication system that we have with ourselves. And none of those communications are our enemies. They're there to tell us something, to communicate with us, to help us navigate what's going on between ourselves spiritually and the 3D world that we're experiencing.
How have you experienced the conversation today?
Oh, it's wonderful. It's really nice to have a back and forth. It's really nice to have questions that probe a little further, that have a little bit more context and interest and insight to them. You talk to all kinds of people doing this type of thing. And I've talked to people, as I mentioned before, who are more worried about whether or not I'm possessed by a demon. I've talked to people who asked me if it would be possible, look at Kim Kardashian in an astral state. So you talk to all kinds
Gosh.
of people. My answer to him, like, you can't. I mean, you can look up Kim Kardashian now, though. Like, there's pictures of her all over
Yeah.
the internet. So kind of a waste of astral projection. So yeah, I talk to all different kinds of people, and the interactions are always interesting. But it's certainly nice to engage in a conversation with somebody who's interested in the depth of the inner exploration and what can be gained from it, rather than whether or not you could spy on a celebrity or whether
Yeah.
or not spirits are watching you when you're in the shower or that type of thing.
It's been an interesting and inspiring dialogue, and I'm very grateful for the back and forth. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're interested and you want to do my show as well, we can set up a time for that. I would love to hear how you got into being so interested in these types of things and what kind of a journey led to that exploration. It sounds to me like very much an in-depth look, like a mixture of spirituality, but also psychology and the grounded work in the real human experience. So many people seem to be trying to flee Earth realm or to ascend, and it's nice to talk to somebody who's taking that spiritual experience and applying it to the human experience, the human
Mm.
world. How can we be better? How can we change the human experience here? It's nice to meet a fellow earthling who's not so eager to flee. Sending consciousness away from this terrible escape room realm we're all in, but like, really, how do we apply it here and use
Yeah.
it to enhance the experience for everyone? So I find it uplifting to talk to somebody who is ascended, curious, but grounded, focused on things. I would love to have you on the show to talk about especially astrology, because so much you see on YouTube is all tarot readings based on your sun sign. It's become very commercialized, and that makes me sad. I feel like, again, one of the points of the show is real talk about some of these things that have just become so generic and commercialized and put out there that it's losing a lot of fundamental meaning for people. There's a billion tarot channels, but tarot has a rich history of stuff as well. Astrology has a lot of important in-depth things about it that really just get tossed by the wayside and prepackaged. I don't know, a tool for whatever I'm
Yeah.
channeling collectively to come through. But you do see a lot of channels, and it's funny the different vibe you get off of people. They're all reading tarot, but like definitely very focused on very different things depending on who they are. Some of them is drama tarot. They can tell the people who just want to tell you a story. You know what I mean? It's more theater than it is anything else.
Mm.
Then you have people who are probably a motivational speaker. tarot. Like, you can do it and make your plans. People like that. It's a vehicle for motivational speaking. So there's so much of that out there. It's really weird to watch that sort of thing. But yeah, it'd be interesting to have a conversation about the aspects of astrology that just really kind of get lost in the din of spirituality out there at the moment.
I'm a student like Zen. I'm a beginner's beginner. I hate the prepackaged cultural yuck of defining something. You need a rational title in order to pursue the irrational. I get that. You need a hook to hang your hat. That's what I strive for, is to have these conversations that are open and engaged and not full of cliches and fluff, but to examine through the elements, through the practicality, through the intellect, through science, because I think spirituality is a science. It's going to be overwhelming, especially with what's happening in the next 20 years, is that there is going to be all kinds of new things. This is the age of fire and air. These energies need to come in, but they also need not only to be measured, but to be interpreted in a pure way, not in a way that encompasses a belief system. We need to
step away from the woo-woo terminology. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. It's all well and good to have angels, guides, and ancestors, whatever your belief system is, whatever it is you're communicating with. But if we're going to make significant progress that can be experienced by all, right? Like, I don't want these things to be just for gurus on mountaintops. Like, what good is that doing?